Well, speaking of spirit and spirits, the Holy Spirit, human spirits, dangerous spirits, well, it's all part and parcel of being the church. We at times kind of throw around spirit language quite easily, even though when it comes to talking about the Spirit of God, we're actually on pretty slippery turf. How do we even approach the holiness of God? Something that is by definition beyond our comprehension. Granted, that's not a problem for folks who typically pontificate about things they know nothing about. But for thoughtful Presbyterians, let alone all the skeptics in the world, talk of God's Spirit is quite the challenge. Yet, talk we do. And believe. We do that as well. And then we act on those beliefs. The Spirit is what we're all about. Now, there are good spirits and evil ones. Note the contrast from kindness to arrogance, from fairness and justice to manipulation and abuse. In our common day-to-day language, often people talk about, well, I'm just kind of down today, or other times, wow, I'm on a cloud. We speak of feeling low or energized, motivated or despondent. These are all descriptions of quite real spiritual realities. Spirits drive our lives. Now, over the years, I've become a bit more direct. Oftentimes when I'm visiting somebody in the hospital or nursing home or at a time of transition or change, I'll just start with a very big open question. Just, how are you? Tell me how you're doing. And at times, if it's in a medical setting, I might get the full report on the knee or the kidney or the gallbladder, what pastors tend to call the organ recital. But I'm not present as a doctor, so I might be more direct at times and say something like, well, how are your spirits? Now, in more conservative congregations, the question might be posed, how is your walk with the Lord? It's a good question, but I often ask simply, how are your spirits? And fortunately, most get it. Because there is a spiritual reality that we all know something about, even as hard as it is to explain and articulate. For we know, don't we, about the mystery and the wonder, the curiosity and the complexity of spiritual well-being. So today, I invite you to a mini self-assessment, a spiritual assessment. How are your spirits? What external spirits, good or bad, are pushing against you? Where do you find renewal? Jesus, as we just read from the Gospel of Mark, is all about getting rid of unclean spirits and welcoming the good ones. How are your spirits today? Now, one thing that all historians agree upon about the life and ministry of Jesus, regardless of whether they're a believer or not, is that Jesus was a teacher and a healer. A faith healer in our terms. That would be a redundancy in the first century, because at that time, faith and healing were assumed to be cut out of the same fabric of life. Things have changed. We have different language and understandings. We know that certain mental illnesses are not demonic presence. Well, but we kind of use the term demon in a wide variety of ways, but we have an understanding that schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, for example, are mental illnesses. we would not use the term demon-possessed. But what is crucial to recognize is that the issues and ailments of the spirit are quite real and relevant for us. I mean, questions of motivation, kindness, fairness, purpose, and meaning all fall into the realm of what I would call the spirit. And most of us have figured out a way that, this is all a rather complex mix. Things of the mind and the spirit affect the body and vice versa. For example, I have learned that I need regular exercise. And if I don't get physical exercise, I just start to get kind of blah and lethargic. And so physical exercise and my spirit, they're connected. My wife is very much aware that with the lack of sunlight in the winter, that can affect her mood. And then, of course, mood affects behavior. Healthy spirits help bodies. And as we all know, aching bodies can slow down the mind or drag down the spirit. That's why the placebo effect is quite real. For what we think, believe, and expect have a real impact on the body. So, Jesus was a healer of bodies, of minds, and of spirits. But the focus question today is, what do you make of this language of unclean spirits? Unclean spirits. I mean, that's what this exorcism was about from the Gospel of Mark. What does that mean to you? I was thinking about such things on Wednesday, trying to figure out the relevancy of that category of unclean spirit. We tossed it around in the Bible study, and then later that night I was mulling it over, and not helpful to try to be mulling over your sermon at 11 o'clock at night. Needless to say, I was not falling asleep. So, compliments of the fact that Allison is off at her Bel Air apartment for her interim job, and I wasn't going to interrupt anybody. I put the tube back on, and I'm surfing through HBO movies, and I really could have used something fun and mindless like Monty Python, but what I ran into was the first movie I came across was about the story of Nate Turner, the slave rebellion in the 1830s. And then after a little bit of that, I switched over to The Zookeeper's Wife, also a true account. This one in Warsaw, Poland, where the zoo became the front to help sneak Jewish children out of the ghetto. Let's see. Slavery and genocide, not the combination to fall asleep at midnight. Slavery and genocide. I was answering my question. The big two when it comes to unclean spirits. Then on Thursday morning, the news was all about the sentencing of Larry Nassar, that just dreadful, evil sports doctor who abused children and female gymnasts. Sexual abuse? Well, I guess we'll put that at the top of the list of unclean spirits. In our day, well, unfortunately, in every day. I have a sense that we wealthy North Americans, so captured by medical and therapeutic language and categories of understanding life, that we need to reclaim the ability to talk about the Spirit, the human spirit and the Holy Spirit. Real, powerful things like greed, racism, and the arrogance that leads to the abuse of power are spiritual realities that have to be named and confronted. And in contrast, such things as generosity, respect, kindness, and equality are desperately needed in this and every age. These are qualities of the human spirit. And then, all of us face those fundamental questions of, why am I here? What's the purpose of life? What gives meaning for my day-to-day? And what leads to lasting satisfaction and peace? People of faith know the language of spirit, and our world is longing to hear it. It's tough, though, isn't it? I mean, I think of myself and generally as being pretty well grounded in faith, in purpose, and direction. So then I'm startled, and this is not probably helpful, but I'm startled when I get thrown off track. You know, as if I'm not vulnerable to changes of mood and spirit. So when I get down, I kind of go, oh, what's going on here? You know what? I get discouraged when watching the news, so I shut it off, but I still get dragged down. At low points, I wonder if we as a country are falling back and not moving forward. I realize that I am definitely vulnerable to the vulnerabilities of the moment, more so than I often like to think of myself. But this also comes to mind when I'm revived, because then I realize, looking back, you're in a hole for a little while. And the revival brings that perspective. For example, Allison and I attended with 1 million of our closest friends the Women's March in Washington, D.C. a year ago. And 2 Saturdays ago, we attended the march here in Annapolis. I mean, great events. Both events served to revive my spirit and to lift my soul. Now, sure, the speeches were too many, and some of them too long. Some of the signage was wonderfully creative and other a bit mean-spirited. But democracy is a messy, complicated blessing, is it not? And the plethora of small groups that have sprung up in the last 12 months means that a whole lot more than talk has taken place over the year. I mean, right here in our church, we have FPC Action. Women calling us to take a look at things like public policy and public morality. Comunidad Presbiteriana La Trinidad is now worshiping in our chapel, and Hispanic neighbors are appearing at coffee hour. The recent revoking of TPS for Salvadorans, well, it's not about those people, it's about our neighbors. I mean, the folks who cut grass and paint houses and wash the dishes at the restaurants in which we who have money have the opportunity to visit. Not those folks, but our neighbors, some of whom we now have a chance to meet more readily face to face. It isn't that the issues are easier to understand or the decisions of what I do with my time and my money and my prayers are any simpler to make. But my spirits are lifted, and in turn, my heart, my mind, my feet end up in different places. I am pleasantly startled by the impact of a change of spirit. Now, Jesus spoke directly to spirits. He chased out evil ones and built up good ones. He spoke and taught and healed with authority, as Mark tells us, not like all those folks that are just formulaic and going through the motions. He spoke and acted with authority, What do you think that looked like? I imagine that Jesus had that kind of authority that resonates from deep-seated convictions and solid integrity. He spoke from the depth of his spirit and touched the spirit of those around him. Blessed by the Spirit of God, he lived out of that Spirit. And that, my friends, is the good news for us today. It is possible, by the grace of God, to live and breathe and have our being grounded within the mystery, the wonder, and the power of the Spirit of God. It is not only our longing, but our real potential to live from kindness to kindness, from justice to justice, from spirit to spirit. Thanks be to God.